Thank you, Mr. Jones. Mr. Jones.
Thank you. Can you tell me how much time I have remaining on my original time?
You have 2 minutes, Mr. Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I think I won't take the whole 2 minutes that are remaining. You know, one of the frustrating things for me in this whole debate over AB 32 and RPS and everything that we're trying to do to constrain the economy here in California, or I should say the majority party and its supporters are trying to do to constrain the economy here in California. And I do believe it's disingenuous to say that, you know, these green jobs are driving the economy in California. They absolutely are not driving the economy in California. You know, this whole AB 32 and RPS came from an original debate back in 2006, and you know, I think there's some legitimate debate over the legitimacy of the scientists that were involved in that original debate. And as a matter of fact, I believe that the lead scientist in proposing the RPS and the 1990 air pollution levels has been fairly discredited in successive scientific work. And I want to make it very clear to this body that I believe for myself and the majority of the Republicans in the state of California on this floor that we support scientific research. We support driving policy when the science backs it up and the science supports what's trying to be accomplished. And this is going to seem kind of, you know, maybe sophomoric but this whole debate's driven about 1990 pollution levels.
30 seconds, Mr. Jones.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. One of the questions I can't get answered, this mythical 1990 pollution levels, is there like a jar of 1990 air sitting on a shelf somewhere so that when we get to the 1990 levels, we'll know we've arrived? And I'll close with that, and maybe the author will address that in his close, and I ask for a no vote.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Mr. Patterson, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, I really want to echo those who have suggested we have to be very careful about how this is done. Taking the tour of the independent systems operator the first year I was here and then the second year I was here, working through some of the concerns and some of the problems of reaching the level of 1/3 RPS. A couple of problems are apparent and are obvious. One has to do with the spiking of the cost of electricity in the state of California, and we have seen that as a result of these policies. Number two, we have a grid that is precariously balanced presently, and we also have the significant problem, I think, of the reliability of the grid. There are methods and approaches that can be taken here that will not create the kinds of problems that we had initially. And those problems were real, and I think that we should be paying attention to the fact that we did go through spikes in electricity, we went through reliability problems on the grid, and we presently have today a huge spike in over-procured renewables that we simply can't use right now. Having said all that, if we're going to move to the 50% number, I think we've got to learn the mistakes of the past and correct them. And so I would like to ask of the author, please.
Without objection.
Let me just preface before I ask the author. The author seems busy. In 1 second. The premise is this. As Vice Chair of the Utilities and Commerce Committee, I've spent an awful lot of time at the CFE conferences and a lot of other places listening to all of the parties who have to make this work. And in the last conference, there was serious discussion, serious debate about reaching the 50% level from those who are going to have to produce, distribute, procure, and price. And it boils down to this, and this is the question of the author. Their request was for a pathway, if we were to head to 50%, of one in which the legislature would provide guidelines, not dictates, and that if the producers of electricity and those who would be interested in providing electricity for the RPS were allowed to innovate, allowed to go in different directions that would not favor one particular renewable over another, and create a pathway to 50% that is a guideline, not a dictate. If the dictate is in this bill, I think we have not learned the lesson of the problems previously. May I ask the author, is the 50% a target or a dictate? Is it a requirement with penalty if it's not achieved, or is there room for those who wish to try to get to 50% to have the freedom, because it's a target on the wall, not a dictate from the government? What is the answer to that question? Is it a dictate, or is it a guideline?
Mr. Williams, you may address these questions in your close if you wish.
It is definitely not a guideline. The question, what I feel about guidelines, you might ask Jack Sparrow or watch those Pirate of the Caribbean movies about guidelines. Guidelines are very loosey-goosey, and that is not how we are going to create jobs or renewable energy in the state. However, I think to answer your question fully, the debate has moved on about the question of the mandate and more about the question of what is included. My colleague from Santee is right that most of the debate at this point is about what is included in that 50%, and obviously those discussions will continue.
30 seconds, Mr. Patterson,
Thank
to
you.
close.
Thank you. Members, I think that under the circumstances, not learning the lesson of the mistakes of the effort to get to 30%, I think we need to be listening to those who are asking, we will participate in this and we will get there, but don't put handcuffs on us, allow us to get there by a guideline rather than a dictate. And then finally, I just want to echo what the author had to say. We have got to be in all of this technology neutral. We've got to stop playing favorites with a particular kind of producer. The question before us has to be...
Time has expired, Mr. Patterson. Time has expired. I'm sorry, Mr. Patterson. Time has expired. We need to keep moving debate forward here. Mr. Ting, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in support of AB 645. If we were here on this floor for this debate a number of years ago when we were debating AB 32, you would have heard many of the same things. You would have heard about the energy prices. You would have heard about the concern about reliability. We would have heard that it was absolutely impossible to reach the 33% RPS standard by 2020. Impossible. Well, now we are on the verge of hitting that 33% of RPS by 2020, and frankly, none of the scare tactics have actually come true. And in fact, quite the opposite. In terms of jobs, we have seen the job creation. That is a fact. In 2014, we had more than 50,000 solar jobs here in California alone. In fact, if you look at the actual green economy, the green and clean tech jobs that have been created and are here in California, really all throughout the state, all throughout each and every single one of our districts, actually outnumbered the jobs that are at the 3 independent operated utilities right now. There are more clean energy jobs today than jobs that are employed by PG&E, SDG&E, and SoCal Edison. That's how big this economy is. We're on the verge of really taking a historic step. The rest of the country is watching and waiting to see if it can be done. And as Californians, we've always pushed the envelope. We've never looked in our rearview mirror. We've always looked forward. And this is an opportunity to make sure that we have clean energy, a clean environment, and, frankly, a clean economy. In terms of hydro, I come from a city that actually is dependent on hydropower. But the amount of environmental degradation that it took to get that plant built, the lack of sites up and down this state, really the impossibility and the ability to scale that technology, it really doesn't make any sense to include large hydro into the RPS. Again, we already have a booming clean tech economy. We need that to stay in California. We need the energy to be produced in California, and we need to continue to support the RPS. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ting. Mr. Quirk.
I rise in support of AB 645 and wish to answer a question raised by the member from Santee. Virtually all scientists who study the global warming problem do agree it's caused by carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases. There's a very simple way to understand this, and please listen closely. The only sources that can change climate on as short a basis we are looking at are volcanic dust, solar activity, and then finally carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases. We know greenhouse gases have increased. Of those three mechanisms for changing climate on a short-term basis, only one of them calls for cooling in the upper atmosphere and warming in the lower atmosphere. And that's greenhouse gases, particularly carbon dioxide. That's why I'm supporting AB 645. If you have problems with it, fine, but you shouldn't have problems with the science. The science is good. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Quirk. Mr. Wagner, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I will be brief. The bottom line is yes, if we had been here when AB 32 was originally being debated on this floor, we'd have had some of these same conversations, and I have no hope that the outcome would have changed, but it should have, because AB 32 is leading us down the wrong path, and that's what the energy producers around this state, indeed around this country, are telling us. And we heard from our good colleague from Bakersfield about a tour of the ISO that our colleague from Rockland set up for us. You can't take that tour, you can't learn about the markets, and you can't watch them try to do their job and believe that there is any of the certainty that was talked about by one of our other colleagues. The only certainty here is that California is kind of making up the rules as it goes along. It's including some renewables and not others, as my colleague from Santee pointed out. We're changing the rules from one percentage to another, kind of ad hoc basis, picking what numbers we'd like to meet. The only certainty is the rest of the country is watching us flounder around, mess up the pricing and ultimately the delivery of energy, and to no appreciable benefit. We could fix all of the carbon output of this entire state. We could shut it down. We could go back to the Stone Age, where all we had were fires around the caves at night, and the rest of the world would continue apace, especially the undeveloped world, and they would continue striving for the standard of living that we have given up here to meet these goals that keep changing, and the earth would continue along the path that it's going now, no matter what California does. We are hurting ourselves. We are hurting our future. We are hurting our economic opportunities. We are making business unpredictable in the state of California, chasing some chimerical goal that we can never get to. And when we get close to it, we'll have another bill from the successor to my colleague from Isla Vista or some other successor, changing the rules again. We should have stabbed this beast, AB 32, when it was first before this House. Let's not double down on stupid with this bill. I urge a no vote.
Mr. Thurmond, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I rise in support of AB 645, and while I cannot quote with the scientific elegance of my colleague from Hayward, I can implore to you to use your common sense. We know from our own experience that our environment has changed. Even our children recognize that our environment has changed. We simply must ask ourselves, what do we have to lose for striving to a goal that gets us to cleaner energy using renewables? And we shouldn't ignore the fact that there is a role for many businesses in that goal of striving for increases in how we use renewables. Our traditional utilities and electrical producers will have to upgrade their infrastructure to support these goals, and there are opportunities for jobs and economic development. Again, I implore you to use your common sense. Let's not debate science. We know our environment has changed. We have nothing to lose but trying to support it. We have everything to gain for our children, for our businesses. I urge your support of AB 645.
Thank you, Mr. Thurmond. Mr. Allen.
Thank you very much. I'd like to correct a number of speakers on the floor who said that there was no impact here on AB 645 and raising the RPS, the renewable portfolio standard, from a current level of 33% to 50%. According to the U.S. Energy Information Administration, California's residential electricity rates in 2014 were 41% higher than the national average. 41%. Its commercial rates were 36% higher, and its industrial rates were 62% higher than the national average. Now, I might happen to be a financial advisor and have a degree in economics, but I don't think you need any of that to understand that electricity is dramatically more expensive in California, and this is a regressive cost, which means that this is impacting those that make less money more than everyone else. Furthermore, a study by the Energy and Environmental Economics Incorporated estimated that average retail electricity rates in California would further increase from our high levels an additional 47% between 2012 and 2030 under current policies. Clearly, if we enact AB 645, they're only going to go up from there. Aside from increasing the cost of doing business in California and therein preventing more businesses from growing or locating here in California, which, keep in mind, is jobs, which employ people, which allow them to build houses and raise their families, this bill will raise the RPS quota, simply put, without considering the real-world considerations. Our state is still struggling to reach the 33% mandate that was forced upon everyone originally. There's still 5 years left to reach that lofty, costly, and demanding goal. Once we finally get to 2020, we should actually take a step back and evaluate the cost that we had to pay and the benefits and ask ourselves, was this worth it for all Californians? These arbitrary mandates continue to fail to take into account the ability of our energy infrastructure to provide reliable power to our constituents and our businesses throughout California. Now, I would imagine that even though that many in this body weren't in office, at least in the legislature a few years ago, I think the name Gray Davis might ring a bell. Should Democrats continue down this path of failing to understand the real impacts, costs, and benefits of these arbitrary mandates, our electrical grid could fail once again and bring back a time of rolling blackouts all over the state. Very simply, members, all our constituents want, all hardworking Californian families want, is that we provide reliable power to their homes and businesses when they flip on the switch, and that the energy that we provide doesn't cost them more than their family budgets can afford, especially for those in California on lower incomes. Thank you. I urge no vote.
Seeing and hearing no further debate, Mr. Williams, you may close.
Well, I do want to answer some of the facts left out in the comments from the other side of the aisle, my two colleagues from Orange County. Number one, while the per watt cost in California is higher, because of the investments that the state has led on in energy efficiency, California's residential ratepayers actually pay one of the lower amounts of totality of dollars. And so while the per watt cost is higher, because they are using less wattage because of these investments in renewables and energy efficiency, they are actually paying less. So our policies have paid off to, number one, keep prices low for residential customers, number two, for creating jobs, and number three, and I think this is important, in making sure the energy mix of the state of California reflects the values of the people of California. I do not think it should just be a liberal value that we should be conservative with our natural resources, that we should conserve our energy, and that we should make sure that our energy mix does not hurt our own people or people across the globe. AB 645 is supported by environmental leaders, consumer advocates, labor, and a broad range of renewable energy interests: solar, wind, geothermal, and biomass. And permission to use a prop?
Without objection.
While this jar does not have 1990 air, there actually is there is the ability to look at it in ice bores, not only from 1990, but successive years tracing back to the last several thousand. So I think the science is solid on this. The policy is solid. It's paid off in the past, and we need to increase our investment in something that has helped our economy and helped our people, and more than anything, helped make us consistent with our values, our beliefs, and our ethics. I ask for your aye vote.
The clerk will open the roll. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote. The clerk will close the roll. Ayes 42, noes 26. The measure passes. Colleagues, at this time, we're going to go back to the top of the file. And we're going to go now to file item 34. We're going to pass and retain file item 35, AB 709. The clerk will read.
Assembly Bill 709 by Assemblymember Gibson and others enacting into charter schools.
Mr. Gibson, you may open.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I rise to present Assembly Bill 709, which seeks to require charter schools to comply with the same transparency and accountability law as traditional public schools. Current law exempts charter schools from having to comply with a majority of the law that applies to school districts. However, this requirement of this bill is currently applied broadly to both public and private entities and are beyond the scope of the intent of the charter school exemption. Given the fact that charter schools are publicly funded, the least we could do is ensure that our children are educated by an institution that operates under the law, that ensures sound governance and exclusive principles. I ask for an aye vote.
Mr. Medina, you're recognized.
I rise to speak in support of AB 709. As a principal co-author, I thank the member from Carson for bringing this forward. Currently, charter schools are not required to follow the same rules when it comes to governance and public responsibility. Although charter schools are privately governed, they cannot be excused from the accountability that is required from those in charge of educating our children. AB 709 seeks to resolve this issue by requiring California charter schools to comply with the same transparency and accountability laws as K-12 public schools. I ask for your aye vote on this measure.
Mr. Chavez, you're recognized.
One of the sad things I've observed in the 3 years being a part of this body involved in education is that often we have this argument between charter schools and what people perceive as public educational institutions. In reality, charter schools are public institutions. When charter schools are first brought up, the idea was that they would actually be innovators of change that would some way be able to influence the educational environment in the state. There's one particular area that charter schools do, and that is that in the formation of a charter, They bring together teachers, parents, and community leaders to be involved in the governance of the charter. In fact, it's actually called a governing body. The reason they did that was because they wanted to bring in all the stakeholders to have the best educational environment for the children. It was so successful at getting people involved, the governor actually instituted it, and everybody in here supported it, and that's called local control funding. Local control funding, if you actually see what that's doing and developing local educational plans, is basic. That idea came from charter schools. Prior to that, you had an ADA model and you had winners and losers of programs that we would direct from the state down to the different school districts. So essentially, the charter schools are the innovation for local control funding. Permission to read?
Without objection.
Education Code 47601 has guided charter law for close to 2 decades and states, this is what the Education Code states, it is the intent of the legislature in enacting this part to provide opportunities for teachers, parents, pupils, and community members to establish and maintain schools that operate independently. This system is not broken. It does not need this bill to oversee it. We, as the legislators, need to understand that we will not move our children forward if we continue this battle between the perceived public schools and charter schools. Charter schools are public. They are innovation labs, and many good ideas, as I gave the example of the local control funding, are coming from them. I would ask for everyone to not support this bill.
Mr. Holden, state your point of order.
Thank you.
Point of order is simply that the message that is being presented is off the topic of the bill. And so I'm just raising the point of order that the speaker must address the issues that are called out in the bill, which are very well defined.
Mr. Holden has raised a point of order. I find that point well taken. That being said, I believe, Mr. Chavez, you've closed your statement?
I close my statement. Thank you very much.
Okay. Ms. Baker, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I rise in opposition to this bill and urge a no vote. Our California corporations law already has extensive regulations of nonprofit organizations, including in the conflict of interest area. There's a body of law that is significant in this area. Boards have to have this area covered in their training. This is an unnecessary bill that is imposing on our charter schools a provision that is already well covered in the law, and I strongly urge a no vote.
Seeing and hearing no further debate, Mr. Gibson, you may close.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speakers, to my colleagues for your comments. As I close, I met with the opposition on this bill and intend to work with the governor's office and going forward with specific identifying a compromise dealing and addressing any particular conflict of interest that may arise. And I respectfully ask this body for an aye vote. Thank you.
The clerk will open the roll. All members vote who desire to vote. 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 Mr. Gibson, what's your pleasure?
The call.
Move the call. This item has been, the author is asked to move the call.